This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. And today I am going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive catalogue from one of the greatest bands ever in the progressive metal genre, and one of my all-time favourites, the one and only legendary progressive metal band Dream Theater. And this is part two of a four-part special where I am going to be discussing each different decade of Dream Theater's catalogue of albums. And this is a follow-up to the last one that I did, where I discussed all of Dream Theater's albums from 1989 to 1999. And for today's special edition, which is part two, I am going to be discussing all of Dream Theater's albums from 2002 to 2009. So, as we know already, Dream Theater was formed in 1985 by Mike Portnoy, John Myung, and John Petrucci, and they were originally called Majesty, and then they renamed themselves as Dream Theater, and this would lead to the first ever incarnation, comprised of Mike Portnoy, John Myung, John Petrucci, Kevin Moore, and Charlie Dominici, and that lineup lasted for one album, with Charlie Dominici departing from the band, and then James LaBrie would join the band as a replacement for Charlie Dominici as the band's frontman slash singer, and he would pretty much establish himself as the band's main singer and voice of the band. And that lineup would go on to achieve huge success, and Kevin Moore would leave following the completion of Awake and enter keyboardist Derek Sherinian as Kevin Moore's replacement, and that lineup would last for one album and one EP before Derek Sherinian was dropped in favour of keyboardist Jordan Rudess, who would replace him and make his first appearance on Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory, and that would be pretty much going into the new millennium the ultimate, definitive, and classic lineup of Dream Theater. So, as we headed into the 2000s, the lineup of Mike Portnoy, James LaBrie, John Myung, John Petrucci, and Jordan Rudess would pretty much cement themselves as the classic and definitive lineup for Dream Theater, and they would go on to make some of the best music they ever made together. And this lineup lasted virtually over a decade. And the music would start to, no pun intended, progress. The music would get a lot more darker and a lot more heavier, and also very experimental in some parts. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. I can honestly tell you now, as I mentioned in part one, there is no bad album in Dream Theater's catalogue. Obviously, there are some albums, of course, are a little bit better than others, but I think what I really liked about this incarnation of Dream Theater, which goes without saying is the ultimate classic Dream Theater lineup, is they weren't afraid to go different directions. Whereas in the 90s, they were still very proggy, and some parts were a little bit laid back. It was still classic Dream Theater, but it was of the time. As we headed into the 2000s, what I noticed with a lot of Dream Theater's albums in this period was it got very dark, very heavy. There were influences of death metal, black metal, you know, all sorts of things going on in the music. And it was clear that this was a very different Dream Theater to what we heard in the past. And I think some of these albums are absolutely incredible. So we're going to start with the first album, which came out in 2002, and it's a double album, and this one is called 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. So this marked the beginning of the 2000s period for Dream Theater, and what Great way to kick off the new millennium for this incredible band. And the music, as you'd expect, is excellent. It's very dark, it's very heavy, very monstrous, at times really savage, but it's what you expect from Dream Theater. It's just nothing but world class music. The compositions, the playing, the musicianship, the lyrics, the vocals, everything is on point. And for me, this was the real start of Dream Theater really starting to hit their stride as a band after all of the different lineup changes, personnel changes. I feel that this incarnation of Dream Theater in particular really found their true voice and they really knocked things out of the park. And I'm not knocking any of the stuff that they did in the 90s. Some of that stuff was legendary, but I think in the 2000s, it was like, okay, this is the band, this is what we are, this is what we're going to be doing going forward, and there's nothing stopping us. And I think by this point, for me, Dream Theater went from being a fantastic band to a real force in the progressive metal genre. And I think they really were starting to hit their peak, not just creativity, but also musically as well. So let's have a look, shall we? Yeah, nice. There we go. And the artwork here is just incredible, absolutely incredible. And there we are. There's more lyrics here as well. Nice. Yeah, love it. So, as I mentioned already, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence is a double album. So, on disc one, we've got The Glass Prison, which is 13 minutes long, absolutely kick ass opener. Then we got Blind Faith, which is 10 minutes long, excellent song. Misunderstood is brilliant. The Great Debate, which is 13 minutes long, absolutely monstrous. And then we've got Disappear, which is brilliant. And then on disc two, we got the title track, which is essentially one entire disc. It's 42 minutes long and it's made up of 8 parts. So we've got part one, Overture, part two, About to Crash, War Inside My Head, The Test That Stumped Them All, Goodnight Kiss, Solitary Shell, About to Crash Reprise, and Losing Time slash Grand Finale. Now, some tracks from 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, as well as some that are featured on other albums, made up Mike Portnoy's 12 Step Suite, which dealt with Mike Portnoy's rehabilitation from alcoholism. So it's a very personal piece of music, and you could kind of look at it as Mike Portnoy's 12 Steps to Recovery sort of story, so to speak. So it's very personal, very deep, and very emotional. And the first track, which is called The Glass Prison, made up of 3 parts. So obviously that's a huge part of the 12 Step Suite. And as I said, you could really hear how emotional and personal it is when you listen very closely to the music. But it's still great music, fantastic playing, as you'd expect. And I got to see Mike Portnoy play the whole 12 Step Suite with Shattered Fortress, with members of Haken and NBB's guitarist Eric Gillette, and it was absolutely fantastic. It was a real journey, but very enjoyable nonetheless, and some of Mike Portnoy's best writing ever as a composer. So the standout tracks for me on disc one are The Glass Prison, Blind Faith, and The Great Debate. And of course, the ultimate standout track for me is, of course, on disc two, which is the title track, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. And it's a real journey. It really is. It's one of those pieces of music which is 42 minutes long, made up of 8 parts. You really got to listen to all of it in its entirety. You really get an understanding of how good of a composer Mike Portnoy is, and also how great the entire band is as well, not just as musicians, but as writers as well. But it's a great album, an excellent way to kick off the 2000s for Dream Theater, and I just think it's an amazing album, in my opinion. Certainly up there as one of the best Dream Theater albums ever. So there you have it. 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, excellent album, and one of the band's best work ever, in my opinion. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2003. And this is, for my money, one of the band's darkest and most heaviest albums in their entire catalogue. And I've always referred to this album as the band's cross between early Catatonia meets early Opeth, all wrapped up into one. It's dark, it's brooding, it's heavy, it packs a punch. But after listening to this one again after many years, it's got some really good music. I forgot how heavy this album really was, but there's still some great playing, some great writing here. And as I said, this is like Dream Theater going down the death metal route. It's just absolutely monstrous, big, and massive. And it's one of my dad's all time favorites. He loves this one so much. And the one that I'm talking about is, of course, Train of Thought. And just by looking at the album cover alone, you know that this is not what you would call your typical Dream Theater. It's got a very menacing sound to it, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. And it just shows you that Dream Theater aren't afraid of going in different directions and trying out new things. And that's what I've always liked about this band. They never try to repeat themselves twice. You can still hear the prog influences, of course. You can still hear it's very much Dream Theater, but it's such a dark, heavy album. And sometimes you have to think to yourself, is this really Dream Theater? Doesn't quite sound like them, but you can hear it's them, but it's just really different. And I personally think it's one of their absolute best. I think it's excellent stuff here. So let's have a look, shall we? You know, as you can look at it, it's just black. It's just all black. Black on black, as you can see. Artwork there is excellent as well. Look at that. Love it. Brilliant. And there's more there as well. Always like the artwork that Dream Theater come up with. It's really good. There we are. Got quite a menacing chill to it, hasn't it? There we go. Great stuff. Brilliant. So, tracks we got here are As I Am, which is just one of the most badass openers I have ever heard for a Dream Theater album. It's just really heavy, kind of reminds me a little bit of Metallica. It's just excellent. Then we got This Dying Soul, which is part of the Mike Portnoy's 12-step suite. Absolutely brilliant. Endless Sacrifice is excellent. Honor Thy Father, which is an instrumental, which is absolutely brilliant. Vacant is great. Stream of Consciousness is brilliant. And In the Name of God is just fantastic. The whole album, from top to bottom, is brilliant. It's heavy, it's dark. Savage guitar playing from Petrucci. Dirty bass work from Myung. Monstrous drumming from Portnoy. Great keyboard work as always from Rudess, and James LaBrie. He's just vocally on top form as always, and the whole band just sound absolutely incredible. And the standout tracks for me are As I Am, This Dying Soul, Honor Thy Father, Stream of Consciousness, and In the Name of God. Excellent album. One of the band's darkest and most heaviest albums in their entire catalogue, and as I said, this is kind of like the band's answer to Catatonia, but just a little bit different. And some of the material is a bit on the melancholy side of things, but still highly enjoyable nonetheless. So there you have it. Train of Thought, one of Dream Theater's best and most darkest albums ever. Love it. Great album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2005. And this, for me, is quite possibly the best album that Dream Theater ever put out, certainly as far as this lineup is concerned. And it's held in very high regard by a lot of fans, and rightly so. And I've seen Dream Theater play several tracks from this album, and for me, it's one of the band's absolute best ever. I certainly put this one up there with Images and Words and Scenes from a Memory in terms of true masterpieces. So, after several dark and heavy albums like Train of Thought and 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, the band decided to create a more traditional type of Dream Theater album, and I think they actually did exactly that. And this one is called Octavarium. So, Octavarium is looked upon by a lot of fans as one of the greatest Dream Theater albums ever, and as I said earlier, rightly so. It's got lots of great tracks, and this is kind of the band going back to more of their roots, but in a more different direction, so to speak. And it's excellent. And wow, this album, can't say nothing but good things about this one. It's an absolute masterpiece. And I think by this point, the lineup of Portnoy, LaBrie, Myung, Petrucci, and Rudess was really at its all-time high. They were going strength to strength, getting stronger and stronger, and really were at their peak by this point and just delivered an absolute masterpiece, in my opinion. So let's have a look, shall we? I like the cover to this. Look at that. So cool. So there we are. Brilliant. So it's not as dark and heavy as Train of Thought. Just classic Dream Theater. There we are. There's more lyrics and tremendous artwork as well. As you can see, there's more lyrics here. And I do like this one a lot. This is really good. Gets your head thinking there when you see things like that. Yeah. Great. So we got the first track, which is The Root of All Evil, again, part of Mike Portnoy's 12-step suite. Absolute badass opener. And then we got The Answer Lies Within. Absolutely brilliant. These Walls is excellent. I Walk Beside You is great. Panic Attack, Never Enough is classic Dream Theater. And Sacrificed Sons is another great track as well. And for me, the highlight of the entire album is the 24-minute epic, the title track Octavarium, which is made up of 5 parts. Part 1 is Someone Like Him, Medicate, Awakening, Full Circle, Intervals, and Razor's Edge. For me, one of the band's best compositions they have ever written, and just 24 minutes of Dream Theater epicness. Doesn't get any better than that. And probably one of the greatest Dream Theater songs ever written. It's just so damn good. And the standout tracks for me are The Root of All Evil, The Answer Lies Within, I Walk Beside You, Panic Attack, and the title track Octavarium. But the whole album, from start to finish, is classic Dream Theater, and for my money, probably the band's best album as far as this lineup is concerned. It's an absolute masterpiece. I just love it, and it's not hard to see why fans hold this album in such high regard. It's a classic, in my opinion. So there you have it. Octavarium, one of Dream Theater's best albums ever. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2007, and it's another favourite of mine, and this one is called Systematic Chaos. So, again, another great masterpiece from this incredible band, and the lineup of Portnoy, LaBrie, Myung, Petrucci, and Rudess. They're just continuing to get stronger and stronger and just putting out incredible music. And with Systematic Chaos, it's no exception. Fast, heavy, dark, classic Dream Theater, the playing, the compositions, the lyrics, the vocals, everything is on point. Boom, boom, boom. It's just absolutely amazing. And wow, some of the tracks on here are just absolute kick ass, in my opinion. So let's have a look, shall we? I like the cover here, and I like that even more. Nice. So, although there's only 8 tracks on this album, they're all quite fairly long pieces. So, there's the guys. I'm sure John Myung baths in the Lazarus Pit. The guy never ages. So, there's another cool shot of the guys. And there is the wizard himself, the Merlin of keyboards. Love it. So, we got the lyrics and some more lyrics as well. The artwork here is really good. What I've always liked about Dream Theater, they put out some cool artwork. So some more lyrics as well. And Repentance is, of course, part of the Mike Portnoy's 12-step suite. There's more lyrics here. Very dark and monstrous. Love it. And there's more lyrics here as well. And of course, shot the guys in the studio. Brilliant stuff. So a very great, heavy Dream Theater album. And, you know, I think after Octavarium, I think Dream Theater were just quite happy just to go back and make a classic Dream Theater album, I would say. And it is a classic Dream Theater album. It's a very good album, in my opinion, one of the band's best. So we got In the Presence of Enemies, Part 1, which is a great opener. Forsaken is a great track as well. Constant Motion is just one of my favourite tracks from this album. I love Myung's bass playing. It's just so dirty and grisly. Love it. And we got The Dark Eternal Night is a great track. Repentance is another excellent track as well, which is like 10 minutes long. Prophets of War is a great track. The Ministry of Lost Souls, which is like nearly 15 minutes long. Absolutely epic. And then In the Presence of Enemies, Part 2, which is like 16 minutes long. Love it. It's a great closer as well. It's cool that we have In the Presence of Enemies, Part 1, which is a kick-ass opener, and then we close out with Part 2, which is just an excellent way to end the album, in my opinion. And everyone is on top form, especially Mike Portnoy. He's just all over this album with hard-hitting drumming and some great vocals as well. And I love the little trade-off between LaBrie and Portnoy on the vocals. I thought that's one of the highlights. The keyboard playing of Rudess, as you'd expect, excellent. The guitar playing from Petrucci, savage. And Myung's bass playing, for me, is the highlight of this entire album. He's got such a big presence and he just sounds incredible. And the standout tracks for me are In the Presence of Enemies Part 1, Constant Motion, Prophets of War, The Ministry of Lost Souls, and In the Presence of Enemies Part 2. But this entire album, from top to bottom, is classic Dream Theater and one of my favourites from the 2000s period of this band. So there you have it. Systematic Chaos, one of the band's best albums ever, and certainly one I put up there with Octavarium. It's just excellent. So there you have it. Systematic Chaos, brilliant album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2009. And for me, it's my all-time favorite Dream Theater album as far as this lineup is concerned. And it's probably the heaviest album in Dream Theater's entire catalogue, certainly up there with Train of Thought. And this one is called Black Clouds and Silver Linings. And this is a double album. And for me, the lineup of Portnoy, LaBrie, Myung, Petrucci, and Rudess, just in terms of musicianship, have never ever sounded better than they do on this one. Everyone is on top form, and everyone just really showcases and puts out their best playing ever. Portnoy's drumming is all over this album. It's massive, it's muscular, it's hard hitting. LaBrie's vocals, he has never sounded better than he does here. He's on top form. Petrucci, he's in full shredder mode. Some of his best guitar work ever. Myung, rock solid on bass, and Rudess, he's just got such a massive presence on the keyboards, and he just sounds incredible. And this album is a very important one for lots of reasons, and in terms of historic significance, which I'll get to in a moment. But I think with this album, this is where the band really reached its peak. And I put this up there with Scenes from a Memory, just in terms of excellent playing. So let's have a look, shall we? A little bit of foreshadowing there, that door. And there's the track listing. I love how all the artwork showcases a different theme to the tracks. I think that's a really nice touch. Lots of bands have done that, but I just like when they do things like that. It's kind of like telling a story in a way. So more lyrics there. And there is the guys looking badass as ever. There we go. Brilliant stuff there. And there we go. Very ominous feel. There we go. So disc 1 is the album, and disc 2 we've got is some covers. So on disc 1 we've got A Nightmare to Remember, which for me is probably one of the most epic openers I've ever heard for a Dream Theater. You know, it kicks off with sounds of thunder and lightning and rain, and then Rudess just comes in with this big cathedral Dracula-like keyboard playing, and it's got lots of black metal influences. It's just wow. It starts off very heavy, then it goes into this laid back section, and then it just picks up steam round about the third half. It's just absolutely unbelievable. A Rite of Passage is excellent. Wither is another great track. The Shattered Fortress, which is like the final part of Portnoy's 12-step suite. And I saw the band that Portnoy put together of that same name play the whole 12-step suite, as I mentioned earlier. And it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen. To see all of these different pieces that were put out on different Dream Theater albums all come together. Doesn't get any better than that. It's just brilliant. The Best of Times, another great track as well. And The Count of Tuscany. Excellent. Although there's only 6 tracks, they're all really long and wow, just brilliant stuff here. And then on disc 2, which is all our covers, we've got Stargazer by Rainbow. We've got Tenement, Funster, Flick of the Wrist, Lily of the Valley by Queen. And then we've got Odyssey by Dixie Dregs, Take Your Fingers from My Hair by Zebra, and one of my all-time favourite songs, Larks, Tons and Aspic Part 2 by King Crimson, which features a special guest appearance from Mother Hishnell Orchestra violinist, the legendary Jerry Goodman. And then we've got To Tame a Land by Iron Maiden. Wow, they do some brilliant versions of these covers. Just absolutely brilliant. And the standout tracks for me on disc one are A Nightmare to Remember, A Rite of Passage, The Shattered Fortress, and The Count of Tuscany. And my favourite tracks from disc two are Lark's Tons in Aspic, Odyssey, and Stargazer into Tamerland. But great album and one of the band's best ever, and I just think it's absolutely amazing. And Black Clouds and Silver Linings would mark the final appearance of drummer Mike Portnoy as he would leave Dream Theater in shocking fashion to pursue his own musical ventures. And he would put out a number of different albums with a number of different bands and artists, from the Neil Morse Band to Flying Colours to Sons of Apollo to Transatlantic to the Winery Dogs to Adrenaline Mob to Liquid Tension Experiments to Metal Allegiance, you name it. Mike Portnoy conquered the world and played in a number of different styles and configurations and achieved massive success. But this would also mark the final time that Portnoy, Petrucci, LaBrie, Myung, and Rudess would play together, thus bringing an end to the 2000s classic lineup of Dream Theater. But Dream Theater would move forward and bring in a new drummer to replace Mike Portnoy, the one and only Mike Mangini. And we would not see this classic lineup of Dream Theater reunite until 2023, when Mike Portnoy returned to the fold after more than 15 years away from the band. So there you have it. Black Clouds and Silver Linings, for me, my all-time favourite Dream Theater album, and probably one, if not the heaviest album in their entire catalogue. So there you have it. Black Clouds and Silver Linings. Excellent stuff. So which Dream Theater album from 2002 to 2009 do I think is the best one? Well, they're all different. They're all fantastic. There's no bad album in this portion of the band's catalogue. I love 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. I think it's a fantastic album. Same with Train of Thought. I think that's a great album as well. Octavarium is probably the band's ultimate masterpiece as far as the 2000s lineup of Dream Theater is concerned. Systematic Chaos is excellent. And I think Black Clouds and Silver Linings is a fantastic album as well. But if I had to choose one album that I think is the best one, I would definitely go with Black Clouds and Silver Linings. I think this was where the band really reached their peak with the lineup of Portnoy, LaBrie, Myung, Petrucci, and Rudess. I think they just never sounded better than they did on this one. And it's a very dark and heavy album. Maybe not as heavy in some parts like Train of Thought, but it's still very dark and ominous. And, you know, you could see the band were going in a more death metal direction. But I think it ultimately works. But for me, this is their best album. Octavarium is up there. It's very close, but for me, I think this is the one that they really nailed it, in my opinion. So there you have it. Black Clouds and Silver Linings, for me, the best album of the 2002 to 2009 portion of the band's catalogue. Love it. Great album. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Dream Theater album from 2002 to 2009? Is it 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence? Is it Train of Thought, Octavarium, Systematic Chaos, or Black Clouds and Silver Linings? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series, where I'm going to be back with part 3 of the 4-part special, where I'm going to be discussing all of Dream Theater's albums from 2011 to 2021. So make sure you don't miss that. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.